Hello. In this video, I want to walk through how to use the Vlookup formula. This will work both for Google Sheets and Excel. So if you're looking for a quick refresher, I'm going to walk through the formula briefly in just a moment. If you're looking for more information about each step of the formula, the different inputs, pitfalls, and then some use cases, things like that, stick around and I'll walk through this in more detail later on. So for a quick refresher, we'll go ahead and enter a formula. In this case, I'm going to look up these transaction IDs and pull the units sold for each of these unique IDs. I've already pulled these from my table list on the left. So I'll go ahead and hit equals, type in my formula, in this case, Vlookup. The search key is the ID that I'm looking to identify in this case, or to look up. Each input is separated by a comma. The range is the table range where I'll find my ID as well as the information that I'm looking to retrieve. So in this case, it will be A through C. The index is the column which I'll find the information that I'm looking to retrieve. In this case, it is the 1, 2, 3, third column of the range I selected. So I want to enter 3. And then the last input is this sorted or not, which is essentially asking, do you want to do an exact match or an approximate match? In this case, I'll do false because I want an exact match. Hit enter. You can see that this correctly retrieved the units sold for each of the associated IDs. So now I'm going to dig deeper into the Vlookup formula. I'm going to walk through each step with a little more detail, as well as share general insight and some possible pitfalls that may stump you for the future. So the Vlookup is short for vertical lookup. And essentially all we're doing is we're taking a value, a unique identifier of sorts. You're looking for that in a list, a vertical list. Once the formula finds that value, it then is going to retrieve another piece of information from that same row. And that is an important piece. It must be in that same row. So I'm going to walk through the formula and highlight each input. I have listed off all that information down here as well. And then after that, we'll talk about some pitfalls. So to start any formula, you always start with equals. In this case, we'll type in Vlookup and select our formula. Now, of course, you have this help window, which, if you expand this here, this will give you some more information. But if you have any trouble understanding that, of course, I've listed that out as well. The search key is the value or identifier that you're looking for in your table. So in this case, we're going to use transaction ID. There's a couple things you need to note is that it must be in the first column of the range that you identify later in the process, and it must match the value exactly. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So in this case, we're looking for a transaction ID. Each input is separated by a comma. Now the range is the range which you will find both the search key and the value that you were looking to return. So in this case, I want the transaction ID in my first column. And then in this case, since we're pulling units sold, I need to have the formula pull all the way to units sold. Now, if I only wanted the country, I could just use the first two columns. But in this case, I need to highlight all three. The index is the column number in that table you just defined for where the information you're going to retrieve is found. So in this case, it is column 1, 2, 3. It's the third column. Note that I did include the first column where the transaction ID is found in that count. That is important. And then the last step is defined by, it's called is sorted. And essentially it's asking for a true or false input. And it's basically defining, are you looking for an exact match? So you're looking to find this value exactly or approximately. Now generally speaking, you will always enter false, which means you want an exact match. There are very few cases that I've ever run into where you might want to use an approximate match. And using the Vlookup, generally you're looking for an exact value. You don't want an approximate estimate. You want to know exactly what the unit solds were for this ID. So you'll enter false. Now, if you enter true, it would be approximate, or if you left it blank. True is the default value, so if you leave it blank, it will default to true, which could stump you a little bit. Hit enter. Of course, I could autofill, but I also just like to drag this down. This will now update and populate for each associated transaction ID. And there you have it. We have set up our Vlookup. Now, a couple things to note as well in setting this up that could stump you. Now, if you have multiple possible matches, you could have the wrong information returned. So what by that I mean, let's say this value was also in row 14. Now you'll notice row 14, the value of units sold is 958. When I added that, this didn't change. That is because the identifier, the VLOOKUP will always pull the first identifier found. So it sees this first row, it sees this at the top of the list, so it will pull 1618. Now if I delete this identifier, now it can't match to that, it will then go to row 14 and pull 958. But again, if you have it in two different places, it will always pull the first one. Now the second common issue that you could run into is if you have any typo at all or variance in your ID, it could throw it off, including a space. So if I have a space by accident, now it's not matching. So that could throw you off. And more common would be if you had some sort of typo. For example, if you left off the last 2 in the ID, it can't match to anything. So there's a couple possible issues you can run into, and there you have it. There's how you use the VLOOKUP formula. I hope this helps.